Morning, folks. Welcome to another of our devotionals. Last time we saw how the psalmist affirmed to the Lord that he had not kept the company of evildoers. In other words, he hadn't chosen to willingly socialize and spend an inordinate amount of time with those who promote wickedness. This was part of his walking in faithfulness to God. He was careful of the company that he kept. Now, it has to be said that avoiding the company of sinful people does not of itself guarantee that one will not sin. Sin is a very personal, a very individual thing. We can sin against God even when we are on our own. So the psalmist in verse 6 goes on to speak about his own life of godliness. He says, I wash my hands in innocence and go round your altar, O Lord. That phrase, I wash my hands in innocence, was a well-known Jewish turn of phrase for keeping oneself guilt-free. It was a solemn attestation that one was innocent before God. The same phrase is used in Deuteronomy 21 and verse 6, and you'll remember how Pilate washed his hands in innocence with regards to the Jewish desire to have Jesus crucified. It was also, of course, required of the priests before they undertook their ceremonial duties that they wash their hands, a sign of not having known sin in their life. If they were unclean, if they had known sin, they couldn't carry out their ceremonial duties. So David says, I wash my hands in innocence. I am free from known sin in my life. He then goes on to say, and go round your altar. And the thought there is that of coming before God in order to have fellowship with Him. You see, sin is a barrier to fellowship with God. Holiness of life is the pathway to experiencing and enjoying true fellowship with God. David goes on in verse 8 to say, I love the habitation of your house and the place where your glory dwells. Here's a man who delights in coming to worship God. We know that God dwelt among his people in the tabernacle, in the temple. The Shekinah glory filled the holy place above the mercy seat. David knew that was where he could come before God. That was where he could enjoy fellowship with God and worship God, in the assembly of God's people, in the place of appointed worship. In verse 7, he speaks of proclaiming thanksgiving and speaking of God's wondrous deeds. So here's a man who loved the place of public worship, a man who guarded his life against sin so that when he did go to worship God, he could truly enter into worship and enjoy fellowship with God. I wonder, brethren, can we say to God, I love the habitation of thy house? Now, of course, we don't believe for 1 minute that God dwells in our church buildings. But it's true to say that God is present in a special way among his people when they gather for public worship. The public worship of God is a wonderful opportunity to come before God and enjoy fellowship with God. It's sad that it seems as though so few professing Christians truly delight in worshipping God. Whenever you consider the many people who never attend an evening service and yet profess to love the Lord. Of course, it has to be said that the mere appearing before God is no guarantee of true fellowship with God, nor indeed of bringing acceptable worship to God. Like David, we have to come in the right spiritual condition. Wash my hands in innocence. In other words, guilt-free, not coming before God with known unconfessed sin in our lives, because God says, David says, if I regard sin in my heart, the Lord will not hear me. So brethren, cultivate a worshipful spirit towards God. Cultivate a godly life. Look upon the public worship of God as something to really look forward to. And when engaging in worship, wholeheartedly proclaim and give thanks to God and speak of his wonderful deeds. That's what the psalmist is saying in verses 6 to 8 here. And may we, with God's help, be able to emulate him. Every blessing.